Hey all, Heretic here, and today in the Battlegrounds, we're talking about Naga. We're going to talk about all the minions, spells, trinkets, heroes, you name it, we're going to talk about it and cover it all and break it down for you. Now, as always, things may or may not change, and if they do, there will be comments below talking about those changes and if this is something you dramatically have to worry about. If they happen to say redo a whole tribe, that's hopefully the end of the season, and we'll deal with that during the next video, but I might have to redo it sooner. You never know. Let's jump right into it. First, let's talk about what makes Naga unique, and that is Spellcraft. Spellcraft is a form of spell that will generate either at the beginning of your turn from minions that can, or from spells or combat results. There's lots of ways it can come out right now. But ultimately, this spell only lasts until the end of the turn, and if you don't use it, it just poofs and goes away. Also, if you say have more spellcraft than you have room in your hand, these will sit in a queue kind of where you can't see them. You just have to remember what they are. And then when there is room in your hand, they will then fill into your hand. You don't discard them. Mind you though, anything that you add after, sometimes there's weird mechanics in the game where you might discard something other than a spellcraft because you're full on spellcraft, but hopefully that's something gets changed one of these days. I know a couple instances of this have been fixed over time, but there are still times when having a full hand can be detrimental, so keep that in your head while you're trying to build your board and make it all work. Spellcraft is cool. You can target any of your minions and it will give a temporary buff for the most part, sometimes permanent depending on those minions' abilities or trinkets you have in play. You can target the shop to get those buffs on minions you want to buy. Say you have, say, a zesty shaker on your board. You play your deep blue on it, and then all of a sudden you have another zesty shaker in your hand and you play a deep blue on it. Then you see another zesty in the shop. You can now target that zesty in the shop with, once again, probably your deep blue buff. And then when you triple it, you can then cast deep blue on it again, so you get the additional value of the gold version. Just remember to try to make sure you have room on your board and in your hand for all these different interactions. You get these interactions to happen in the correct order for the best results. A lot of trinkets, a lot of hero abilities, things can change when you want to cast certain things if you can help it. Sometimes there's no great way to get them out in the right order. Just be happy you have the benefit of it. Spellcraft is a really neat mechanic that you need to spend some time to get used to if you haven't played with it, because it is pretty handy to put those buffs where and when you need them, because they're more than just stats. Sometimes they're divine shield. Sometimes their ability to discover different minions. Sometimes their stats to your whole board. Sometimes they're gold. There's a lot of different spellcrafts, and every time there's some kind of shakeup of the meta, they introduce new ones and remove some of the old ones. So pay close attention to these because they can be very impactful. Let's talk about the minions we use when we're playing Naga. Now, of course, we're not going to cover all of the minions. Minions I deem not really worth mentioning. That's at my discretion. If you have questions, please post them in the comments below about why I may not have included one. Could have been something complicated where I'm just like, no, they're boring, they don't do anything. Or it could be something as simple as spaced and forgot about that one. There's lots of weird things. Like if you go to the Battlegrounds website and you select a tribe, it actually doesn't show you all the minions that are associated with that tribe. It only shows you the minions with that tag. Example would be if you say, went there and said, show me all the demons. Well, it won't show you Wrathweaver. Wrathweaver is kind of important if you're playing demons. At least if you're trying to learn about them and you don't know about it or understand how it works, you not seeing it there would think, huh, this must be associated with something else because it's not a demon thing. We're going to be starting with Tier 2's Lava Lurker. Now, Lava Lurker is a 2/5 Naga. It says the first spellcraft enchantment on this each turn is permanent. That means whatever you put on this first sticks with it forever. Whether it's just a couple stats of buff or it's a divine shield, whatever you're hitting this with, it's permanent. So I always like to warn people, try not to put taunt on this first by accident, because then it is much more difficult to remove taunt than it is to add it. Remember, you can cast any other spellcraft first and then the taunt spell, then you don't have to worry about it, because sometimes in the early game, a giant buffed Lava Lurker with taunt's great. But come the late game, you really don't want your largest potential minion to have taunt, so people always know how to kill it, and you're busy looking for a tricky trousers to remove taunt from this. If you don't find it, it's going to be very annoying. This definitely can become a very late game card, as it is going to continue to get bigger during the duration of the game. Next, we have the Glad-i-ator. Glad-i-ator is not super complicated a card, right? It is a 3/3 that is Divine Shield, and when you cast a spell, it gains +1 attack. Now you're sitting me going, why are we covering this, Heretic? This is really simple. I cast spells, it gets attack. Because you really have to consider when you cut this. This thing can get incredibly big attack, but its health never really grows. So definitely, as you're getting later in the game, if this thing is absurdly big, consider cutting this for more ways to grow the stats on the board for you. While it is really cool to have this giant Divine Shield minion, in some games this is really useful. Against Murlocs, giant Divine Shields are great. Against beasts and undead, not super useful when they don't really have much health. Just try to weigh what your final opponent boards are looking like and cut this thing. And if you don't think you're gonna need it, no later than really like 10, so it's not so absurdly big you have to really have a long thought about cutting this or not. Shell Whistler is a 3/2 Naga that reads Battle Cry, get a random tavern spell from tier 2. Well, tier 2 has a lot of good tavern spells, from economy to minion generation. It's just a really nice tier. And it's a spell which typically interacts pretty well with the rest of your tribe. It's never really a bad thing to cycle because it's almost always going to come close to paying for itself, even with it being a random spell. So Shell Whistler, well, if I have better targets, you have something that gives you guaranteed tempo, some nice value, you could take that. But this is pretty solid, and at tier 3, it's not horribly statted considering the benefit of what those spells could give you. Deep Blue Crooner is a 2/2. It has a spellcraft that reads, give a minion +1/+1 until next turn, improve your future deep blues. Now, if you haven't been playing Naga, learn this, because this is important. This is a bedrock of how you play Nagas. You have this spell which you will continuously cast and will get better and better and better. You can make it permanent by casting it on a lava lurker. You can cast it extra times by targeting Zesty Shakers. If you get a chance and you can't make this triple, use the Eyes of the Earth Mother spell on this thing to make it gold, and then it will give you the golden deep blue buff, which is double that scaling and just fantastic and worth it. At any point, I would say if I'm offered the Naga Trinket that is going to give me additional casts of spells and I have a deep blue, this is my build. This is what we're doing, because it is going to scale so much. It can be utterly crazy. One of the big ways to make this work is you're getting to later in the game when your deep blue buff is getting really high and you can find the spell Channel of Devour. You will put all those casts of it onto a minion in the shop, preferably one with bigger natural stats if possible. And then you can cast the spell Channel the Devourer on it, and that is going to give all those stats to one of your minions random, so make sure something you don't want is off the board permanently though. So now, instead of having to worry about, what am I gonna do next turn, those stats, wherever they land, are permanent. So you might have to reposition a bit just to keep that in mind. It might land on the perfect minion, and it might just land on your one taunt and mess you up. There's no way to control it, but it's just a big stat bump. It's well worth it. And also, if demons happen to be in the lobby, also use Mirage Conjurer after you've used all those deep blue buffs to either double the attack or the health of that. And yeah, then spit it and then go, holy crap. You can get insanely big. This is going to be, we're going to cover this completely in the build section later on how to do this, but you're going to be using deep blue a lot. Next on tier 4, we have Slippery Slider. This is a 5/5 Naga that says, Spellcraft, refresh the tavern with an extra tavern spell that costs 1 less. Now this one, I don't know if I really care to have on my board much, but the generation of its Spellcraft is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it is a free reroll that is going to reduce the cost of a spell by 1, which often makes them cost 0 or 1, and that's just fantastic. I definitely like generating this one. I don't know how much I like to actually have it on my board. It's a 5/5 stat line, which is respectable, but otherwise my board's usually kind of clogged with Naga, so it's not often actually on my board. Soft-Hearted Siren is a 3/6. Whenever this takes damage, get a random spellcraft spell 3 times per combat. This is another one of those Naga I don't love to have on my board long. If I get it early, you put some extra health on it, then I don't mind it sitting out, taking a couple hits. That way it generates some random spells. But otherwise, this is nothing you ever want on your board too late or for too long. There's just better Naga out there. Zesty Shaker is a 6/6 Naga, must have for most Naga builds. Once per turn, when a spellcraft spell is played on this, get a new copy of it. You've got it. You target it directly with a spellcraft spell, and it will give you one of them back. Doesn't matter if it's a normal version or a gold version, it just gives you another copy of that spell. And if you golden the Zesty Shaker, it will give you 2 copies of that same spell. So if possible, this is always a valid target for Eyes of the Earth Mother. Make this thing gold, get extra value out of your Spellcraft, dominate the game, and have fun. If I can have my way, I'm sitting there with like 1 deep blue crooner and like 3 golden Zesties and going nuts. Daggerspine Thrasher is a tier 5 4/8 that reads, whenever you cast a spell, gain Divine Shield, Wind Fury, or Venomous until next turn. Let's face it, you're using this for Venomous almost always, and typically as a Naga player, that is not hard to do. You're casting a lot of Spellcraft, which all activate this ability. Just make sure you play this before you start casting them, that way you have enough to fully activate it. Critter Wrangler is a 2/5 that reads, whenever you cast a spell on a minion, give it +2/+2. Now that is an additional buff to whatever Spellcraft you're casting. So whatever spells you're throwing around, this 2/2 buff is relatively significant, especially the longer the game goes and the more spells you're casting. Is this going to be on your board at the end of the game? Typically, no. You're going to cut this. But through the mid game and some of the early late games, say like turn 6 if you get really lucky, through turn 10 to hopefully not longer than 11, this is a decent buff that stacks up to help carry you. Yeah, after that, even if this thing is gold, it's not going to be doing a lot unless you are casting a lot of spells, and even then, be better off replacing it with some certain other minions depending what you manage to find. That being said, it can be quite good, and there are situations where it will just stay there because you never find anything really to replace it with, and because it's probably swollen to such a large size, it's worth keeping. Corrupted Myrmidon is a 4/4 that reads, start of combat, double this minion's stats. That means I don't care how you buff this thing, but you buff it a lot. I definitely don't want to give this taunt if I can help it, because it makes it really easy to kill with a Leroy, a Bramble Witch, or just Venom in general. But if you could sit this thing in the middle of your board, or if you can put it in like slot 2 and just run it into the enemy and start smashing them, it really does a very good job at taking advantage of those targeted stats you can give it. Even if it's just blood gems, permanent stuff, or if you're just throwing your deep blues on it, so when it goes out there, it is just doubling those stats and destroying the enemy with them. It is a very good Naga. If you can get permanent stats on it, though, it is much, much better. That way you can start using your temporary buffs on other spots. The Glow Scale is a 4/6 with taunt, Spellcraft, give a minion Divine Shield until next turn. Now, this is one you've probably used a million times. Maybe it doesn't stay on your board, but that Divine Shield buff is always going to be useful. You always want to make sure you could throw that on one of those really important minions you have. So always cycle at least a Glow Scale when you can, if you can't make space for it on your board to take advantage of that shield. Tide Mistress Athissa is a 2/7 that reads, whenever you cast a spell, give 3 friendly Naga +1/+1. Now, there's a couple schools of thoughts on this. You can just run 3 Naga, including the Tide Mistress Athissa, and cycle a ton of spells and make a very, very big triplet of Naga. Or you can just run as many Tide Mistress Athissas as you want and generate a lot of Spellcraft and just buff them all to the moon. Either works. I would say, obviously, the focusing of the stats it can be quite nice, but it's also nice to run this with something like Deep Blue and a bunch of Zesties. That way, in addition to all that Deep Blue stats you're applying to things, you're getting those permanent buffs from Athissa, just bringing up that baseline of the board to really high levels. Athissa feels really good in the new home at tier 5 they're at, and I feel like is a really solid fit for Naga, especially if you decide to run like a Corrupted Myrmidon, because so many of those stats will bleed over to it and just really give you big value. Jumping up to tier 6, we have Orgazoa the Tender. Now this is a 3/7 neutral that's only in with Naga. Their spellcraft is Discover a Naga. Now, as much as I love Orgazoa, the problem with Orgazoa is keeping it on your board. Typically this late in the game, board space starts to become an issue. And Orgazoa, well, they're great, isn't getting any of the buffs, which can be good. If you're running Athissa, maybe you want this for the spellcraft to give you another Naga for more spellcraft to just immediately sell. And that is a very valid way to cycle up those stats. But also, you could just buy the Orgazoa, triple into it, and then just play it and sell it too, and not really care. Just think of it as economy and buffs. Either way, both work well. Slither Spear Lord of Gains is a 4/6 that reads, at the end of your turn, give your other Naga +1/+1 for each different spell you've cast this turn. Now, this is an important note. Lord of Gains, Much as they work out, they don't get any bigger. Their stats stay the same. But every other Naga, including if you have two Lord of the Games, will buff each other, just not themselves respectively, will get decently big. But that's only if you're casting a lot of different spells in Spellcraft. If you just cast 10 blood gems or 10 deep blue buffs, it's only going to then give all your other Naga a 1/1 buff. It needs variety. If you're not casting a variety of spells, Lord of Gains is not worth it. Typically right now, I don't really love Lord of Gains. Typically it's more of a deep blue Athissa build and you don't need to go to 6. But if you happen to get this and you want this, lean towards a variety of spells, be them Spellcraft, Blood Gem, or just Tavern spells. They're all count as long as they're different. At tier 7, we have Sea Witch zar'jira. Now this 4/5 reads, Spellcraft, choose a different minion in the tavern to get a copy of it. What that means is that anytime you have a copy of a minion on your board or in your hand, and then you see another of it in the shop, and then you have Sea Witch, you just target that one in the shop with the spell. It's gonna give you that copy, and then you can just buy it and have an instant triple. Sea Witch zar'jira is really good at printing triples of anything. And just remember, if you do target a Zesty Shaker, it's gonna use up that Spellcraft and then give you another copy of it. So if you could just make a bunch of Zesties every turn by cranking this out over and over again, it's quite entertaining to do it that way. But either way, Sea Witch zar'jira is a great fit for any board, regardless if it's Naga or not, but it does synergize really well with Naga builds. Let's talk spells. Well, this might not really shock you, but Naga really like a lot of spells. Now, obviously I'm going to cover the ones that are more effective when playing Naga, but that being said, if you have builds that benefit from casting any spells, consider especially any cheap spells you can, just to get maximum value. Because you're going to get so many extra buffs and stats associated because of how Nagas work, that often casting cheap spells is pretty much always going to be worth it. Now we start with the obvious and always not bad for playing any one tribe, that is Chef's Choice, Planar Telescope, and Lost Staff of Hamul. Each of these respectively are going to give you different ways to get Nagas you need, and of course work really well. So always buy these if you think you're playing one tribe or you're definitely leaning into it because easy value. Spite Scale Special is always great when you're playing Naga. First of all, it's 2 gold and it's going to give you 3 different Spellcraft. Now it's random. It might give you 3 of the exact same horrible one, but also it might just give you 3 of the perfect one. That's the nice thing about it, is you're getting 3 spells for 2 gold, and while typically they're not as useful for some tribes depending what tier you're on, especially once you get to tier 5, just the fact that it could give you Divine Shield means typically Spite Scale Special is usually going to be worth it for you. And since you have so many minions that trigger when you cast spells, typically the value is pretty easy, especially when you already know you're playing Naga. This is a good one. Eyes of the Earth Mother is an easy sell for most Naga boards. You've heard me mention it a number of times during this video. The fact that you can make a tier 4 and lower minion instantly gold is typically very much a good thing. Even at 6 gold, it's usually worth it because you're scaling so much from some of these lower tier minions that it's just worth spending the time in gold, an entire turn almost, just to make it gold for those extra stats. Let's talk about the heroes who can excel at playing Naga. And yes, any hero can play Naga. Even heroes that are, specifically for another tribe. Really, their hero power doesn't benefit Naga. It can if you find the right minion. So yes, anybody can play that. Now, the first 2 heroes have very similar effects, so I want to cover them both at the same time. One is going to be temporary, one is going to be permanent, and that really is the defining factor. And these heroes are good at playing a lot of different tribes, but they can really work, especially if you end up doing, say, a deep blue build. Now, I want to start with Mutanus the Devourer. His ability is that you remove a friendly minion, spit it onto another, gain 1 gold. Well, in this case, what you do is you get a bunch of deep blue spells as you cast them. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. You buy 1 random throwaway minion, you put it on your board, you dump all the deep blues on it, and then spit it. Now, you have no control where it's going to land, so make sure there's no minions on your board that you don't want to get the buff, and one of them will randomly get that buff. And you just do that every turn. Mutanus doesn't see a whole lot of play right now, but he can shine, especially in the deep blue build, quite a bit. And conversely, Vol'jin works very similar. but it's not permanent. So what you do is his hero power allows you to take the attack of 2 minions and basically combine them for both of them. So if one's got 40 attack and one's got 40 attack, they both have 80 attack. And you just basically target whoever you want to have it, and they will gain their attack. Now, this is good if you are doing a deep blue build, if you have corrupted myrmidons, whatever you're doing, Build-Jin is going to make sure 2 of those minions have some decent attack. One of them probably already has good, the other one maybe just has a divine shield and you want to give it the extra attack. Maybe you picked up a cleave minion randomly and you're like, oh look, I happen to just have this blade collector who now has 400 attack. It's temporary, but the job is still being done. It's gonna hit and it's gonna kill some things, so Build-Jin can easily work with Naga. And there is one way to make Build-Jin's buff permanent, and that is the spell Channel the Devourer. Remember that spell we talked about earlier? All you need to do is take that spirit swap ability, take that massive attack buff you have, move it to a minion in the shop, then cast Channel the Devourer on that minion. It is gonna land on one of your minions on your board and give them that attack permanently. Just remember that if you do this, to not have a minion that you are cycling on the board, as there is always a chance that spell will land on them and those stats will then probably be wasted. Now, when it comes to heroes that thrive with Naga, we're going to start with Lady Vashj. Lady Vashj's hero power costs 1 gold and reads, discover a spellcraft of your tier or lower. Its effect is permanent. Obviously, the later in the game we go, the bigger those effects can be. Permanent divine shield, extra stats that just can be massive in the case of deep blue. Whatever it is we're talking about, this can be a very, very big buff in the right cases. Typically, early it doesn't do a whole lot, and that's why you don't see a whole lot of Lady Vashj. Kind of hard to pull off, and really, she can play any tribe at all. It doesn't matter who you're giving that permanent ability to, it's just that you're giving it to them. It works well with Naga because it just synergizes with all the things they want to do. So obviously, Lady Vashj is a pretty good fit. Just make sure that you're using that permanent spellcraft on the correct minion at the correct time. Otherwise, you're going to be very annoyed at yourself. You usually can tell because it has a yellowish glow, if I remember right, to it, as opposed to the usual blue coloring. Now, Queen Ashara probably is the best hero, at least in my opinion, hands down playing Naga. That is because the nature of their hero power. Now, initially, it is called Ashara's Ambition, and this is passive. When your warband reaches 25 total attack, begin your Naga conquest. So this can happen during your shop phase, in the combat phase, it doesn't matter. The moment you trigger this, you instantly gain the benefit of getting the new hero power, which is Naga Conquest. 1 gold, discover a Naga. Well, obviously, if you want to play Naga, a hero who lets you discover Naga are pretty good. Now, it lets you discover a Naga from the tavern tier you have access to and lower. So if you're on tier 4, you can find a 4 and lower. You're not going to find a 5 and you're not going to find a 6, but pretty good. I really enjoy this one when I'm playing Naga. It's pretty easy to get a lot of the builds you need because you just sit on those tavern tiers and discover a Naga till you get what you want, and then you go nuts playing those spellcraft and building the build. Ashara is one of the easiest heroes to play Naga with because you're always discovering from at least the tribe you need. Hey all, if you're enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing, comment, all that good stuff. I know I have to ask because a lot of people don't, and it really does help the channel grow, and ultimately that is the only way we'll get Blizzard to actually consider me an official content creator, is if we somehow get enough people. Even though we are over the number required and have been for a while, we need to keep plugging. Maybe if we get just big enough, we can become kind of a tidal wave and push ourselves past the gates that seem to be keeping me out. Thank you for your help. I really do appreciate it. I really do hope these videos are helping you. Let's jump back in. All right, let's talk trinkets. Now, what trinkets work really well with Naga? This is my experience, and those I have seen it work well. I cannot guarantee we'll have 100% results with anything because, well, nothing is 100% in Battlegrounds. But we're going to start with the colorful compass. Both the lesser and the greater, of course, if you find yourself playing any one tribe, are a must because, hey, 1 or 2 random minions from that tribe typically every turn will eventually give you decent value. Love these. The Lore Walker's Scrolls, both the lesser and the greater, again, are going to give you buffs based on every spell you cast directly onto a minion. Nagas have a lot of targeted spellcraft buffs, so considering the value of this can give your other minions that may be normally just sitting there getting a buff, here or there now actually gain some meaningful stats and be able to do a little bit more. And if anything, they will simply raise the stats of the minions you care about a lot more. Also, the Lore Walker scrolls are always a good fit if you're not handed any of the specialty Naga specific ones. Reflective Pendant is a great one if you know you're playing Naga, because typically your board is going to consist of just a couple's particular Naga with as many copies as you can find. Well, if every turn you're getting a copy of one of them, odds are, hopefully you get a little luck and it starts giving you some duplicates so you can start getting more of them on the board. Say if you're looking for a bunch of Zesties and you keep finding Zesties from this thing, you can get a lot of value because often they won't appear in the shop. At least this way you have a chance every turn at getting one. 1 in 7 odds aren't bad. Rusty Trident can be very good as a lesser trinket. It's cheap and it's going to give your Naga a death rattle that gives them a random spellcraft. Well, guess what? You need spellcraft. You're a Naga board. Now you're going to generate some every time one of your minions die. And oh no, you don't have any minions die. Boo-hoo, you win. Who cares? Have fun. Yeah, it's not the best result, but it could be far worse. You could be losing every fight. It is pretty nice when these start giving you early access to those deep blue buffs or just buffs to help you win the fight in general, let alone the scaling to win you the game. Replica Cathedral can give you big value as an early Naga player. Anybody for that matter. The thing to remember is the first spell. Now that is anything. Coins, Tavern Spell, Blood Gems, Spellcraft, triple rewards? Whatever that first spell you cast, it's going to give you an extra. Now, in the case of things that discover, it's just going to give you a random thing. So yes, you'll get your first triple reward if you play that, and then it will give you a random one, but that's still double the chances and it lasts the entire game. So just be very careful which spell you cast first. You might be pushed into positions where you're not going to be able to get the optimal result, but considering what you can get out of these, it's still worth it. Just make sure you don't mess up and waste it on like a blood gem or a coin buff. Nazjatar Postcard is 2 gold, and this is after you play a non-Naga minion, get a random spellcraft spell. Now, I am going to be completely frank with you. I have never bought this one, and I have never seen anyone buy this one. If I'm not playing Naga, I typically don't want this, especially that early, because it's not like I'm just hoping it gives me a divine shield here and there. And if I am playing Naga, there's gotta be something better than this. I feel like at free, this one is too expensive. Devourer sticker is an interesting one, and I feel like it really only shines if you are doing a deep blue build, because it's gonna give you a Channel the Devourer spell at the start of each turn, which means you can cast all your deep blue buffs on your Zesties, and then you can put maybe one on a minion that retains stats permanently in the form of a lava lurker, and then you can dump the rest on a random minion in the shop, then spit those stats and keep them permanently, with always the same caveat. Make sure you don't have a minion you don't want that buff on the board when you do the spit. Make sure you can buy or have something already in your hand ready to play after. Otherwise, you know the stats will land on the minion that you want to get rid of. Precious Pearl is an interesting new spellcraft, and this is spellcraft give a minion +30/+30 until next turn. So like all spellcraft is temporary, but we already know there's ways to make it permanent. If you don't have deep blue and the other greater trinkets are not exciting, this is a 30/30 buff. That is not bad. It doesn't really hold up well compared to other things that can scale for the duration. Yeah, if you are at 5 health, this is great because it means you're desperate and you need those kind of stats to survive. But if you're at full health and there's a way you can scale, say permanently, or a trinket that will give you more value over time, I would typically stay away from this, as because very good for a little while, but it falls off, especially once you get past turn 11 and 12, where it's really just gonna kind of fit compared to most of the scaling you're gonna be running into. Glow Scale Portrait. This one, get a glow scale. Your first spellcraft enchantment each turn is permanent. So you're going to get a minion that's going to give you a divine shield every turn. You do not have to keep this minion. You can get rid of it. And then going forward, the one spellcraft you cast a turn, the first one will be permanent. So obviously, in this case, glow scale is a good example. You can give all your minions divine shield and then find something else to cast first. It's pretty good, Glow Scale Portrait. It definitely can give you a big advantage when people don't expect a permanent board of divine shields, and if they're not paying attention, it can be quite a surprise for people, especially at lower MMR where they don't tend to scout their opponent. They don't expect you to have a board of divine shields. Spite Scale Sushi Roll. Now this one is a fun one. It says you get a Spite Scale Special, which is a tavern spell, and then your first 2 Spellcraft each turn cast twice. Now some of this is redundant, right? If the first spell you cast gave Divine Shield to a minion, giving it twice isn't going to do anything. Mind you, if you have triggers that count spellcrafts and then give buffs attached to those spellcrafts, just because a spell was cast, you will get those, but you won't get any benefit from a second Divine Shield on the same minion beyond that. But if you cast, say, Deep Blue, it's going to cast twice, which is going to scale up twice as fast, which is a really big deal. You could super scale a Deep Blue Crooner build with this, because those first 2 cast twice. If you've got a golden Deep Blue casting twice 2 times, really gets huge. This is how you see Naga boards get completely bonkers out of control with stuff like this. Shaker Portrait. This one is going to give you a Zesty Shaker, but then the kicker is your Zesty Shakers give an extra copy of the spell. So whatever you target them with, just like normal, they're going to give you a copy of that spell back, right? Yeah, but they're going to give you an extra 1 of them. So if you cast a Golden Deep Blue spell on them, they're going to give you not 1, but 2 Golden Deep Blue cast back. Do you have another Zesty? Do you have another Zesty? Do you have another Zesty? It can get nuts, and it is so much fun to get like 3 golden Zesties on your board and just be like, more. Your turns quickly become not long enough as you try to spend your gold quickly and then get all the targets on the right people to get all those cast off while you're quickly running out of time. Shaker Portrait, one of the better trinkets for sure. Let's talk countering Naga. Typically, a Naga board is going to have 2 to 5 large minions, and then the rest will be support minions. So with that in mind, we have to think, how do we deal with these? And it depends. Are they a rookie player who's never really played much, and they're sitting there with a giant taunted lava lurk? Everything we're going to talk about will defeat that. Do they have a small taunt, and do they have a small bump minion up front? Well, once again, you don't want to waste certain minions on these things. If you have a venom minion and it runs into a tiny taunt, or if your taunted minion has venom and their tiny minion bounces off it, the venom's gone and it's wasted. We don't want that. So respond accordingly depending what they're doing. Typically though, Nagas will have a small taunt and they'll have a small bumper minion, with the inside being the threat that you really need to deal with. So how do we deal with that? As always, we need to look at things like Leroy. Leroy either leading your charge, or maybe with taunt, or sitting somewhere in the middle of your board for once the trash is cleared out, so Leroy can hopefully swing out and kill the minions that matter. Otherwise, Venom. We already know that Naga are in the lobby because you're trying to counter a Naga board, so you have Dagger Spine Thrasher, we have Deadly Spore, Murlocs are in. Whatever you do it, there's a lot of Venom minions. All of these are good at dealing with Naga board. Once again, make sure the trash is out of the way before these come in swinging. If Transmuted Bramble Witch is an option for you, once again, this is a great way to deal with a giant statted board. Regardless of how big they are, you turn them into a 3/3, they die. Now, once again, try to remember positioning. Where are their big minions? Do they have a little taunt? Do they have a big taunt? Once again, the most important things. Upper Hand is a useful spell. Yes, does it turn a random minion into a 1 health minion? Yes, but hopefully you get lucky and it swings out and gets the right one. It's always worth it. It's only 3 gold. It doesn't take up a spot on your board. Just toss it out there and hope you get lucky. And one of the other more common things you're going to see with Naga boards are a ton of Divine Shields. There could be a lot of them. If they're permanent and their whole board's lined up with Divine Shields, you have to consider Tunnel Blaster to deal with this. Otherwise, run some of your smaller minions up front, so hopefully they can bounce off those shields, cancel those minions out. Just once again, position accordingly. Don't have a small minion bump off your shields on your enemy's taunt, but then only have a small minion to then hit it again, because it's not going to die and you're just going to waste them. So you might have to alternate positioning depending, once again, how big those small taunt minions are and what you have to work with. Otherwise, Naga are not super hard to deal with, in so much they usually only have a couple monstrous minions, unless they have hit the complete high roll and their entire board is a monster board. But as any time, those should be very difficult, if not impossible to beat, because those are the rare boards that should win. It's time to talk builds. What kind of builds do we want to do when we're playing Naga? What is going to work? We're going to start with a very simple and very common Naga build, and that is the Deep Blue build. Now, if you're not familiar with this one, this is a very common way to build excessively big Naga at relatively low tier. You don't have to go too nuts. You can, in theory, stay at tier 4 with this build the entire game and do just fine, but I will almost always go to 5, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. So what are we looking for when we're playing the Deep Blue build? Well, the main pieces we're looking for, and this might shock you, is the Deep Blue Crooner and the Zesty Shaker. Now, these is a tier 3 and a tier 4 minion. Their interactions are very simple. You take that Deep Blue spell, you cast it on the Zesty, and then you cast it on another minion, preferably something that makes it permanent. But, you know, we work with what we find. One of the things to remember is you can target the Deep Blue spell onto Zesty Shakers in the shop, and it's also highly recommended that you target your Zesty Shakers if you have a triple lined up, the 2 you have and the 1 in the shop, and then you triple it, and then you cast the Deep Blue on them again, because you will get the additional benefits of it giving you more Deep Blues back, because it is now gold. It will not count the ones you already did before it was gold. It's a new minion as far as it is concerned. This build I like to have online by turn like 6 or 7, the latest. If you get the right trinket, that can of course influence you and make you want to go with it no matter what, even if you only have one piece of this. But typically you want to have both of these before you decide you're going to go for this build. Lava Lurker is the next mini you want to add to it. That last Deep Blue cast you do a turn will give the biggest stat bump, and the Lava Lurker keeps those stats permanently. You always want to make sure the very last thing you cast Deep Blue on is the Lava Lurker. Sometimes you're going to get in weird positions where that's not the option. Maybe you're going to spit the spell later, but initially you want to make sure the last one's going on the Lava Lurker. That way it's getting the biggest buff. What's the point of casting it 5 times in a turn if you put the first one on the Lava Lurker? Because the other 4, while they keep getting bigger, are wasted. They're just temporary buffs. The one that you first put on them that is permanent is the important one. So cast on them last. Finally, of the main minions I'm looking for, I think Tide Mistress Athissa would fill that last slot, and that is going to be because they are going to buff the rest of your Naga passively while you're casting spells. If you don't have something like Tide Mistress Athissa, then Deep Blue Crooner is always going to be just a 2/2. There's not going to be a whole lot of stats going on this thing. Sometimes you'll throw a buff here or there on it, but it's not going to be meaningful. But if you're casting a lot, and if you're running a lot of Zesties and Deep Blue Crooners, Tide Mistress Athissa is going to give you big value to get that rest of your board actually to be a threat. Now, what are the optional minions we want to fill things out with? I think for me, Glow Scale is a pretty safe one to have in the back, taunted. If you can't find the Glow Scale for whatever reason, I will often just throw a taunt on my Deep Blue, let it sit back there, because it's never going to be huge. So we just let that fill that role. But Glow Scale is fantastic because it's going to give you that targeted Divine Shield, which once again, when you have a Lava Lurker, maybe for one turn you don't cast the Deep Blue buff on it, as it's the first Spellcraft you put on it, you have the Glow Scale cast on it first, so that Divine Shield is now permanent, as opposed to worrying about the stats that one turn, because the Divine Shield will pay off in the long run. Another minion I like to fit in this board when I can is the Corrupted Myrmidon. Just the fact that anytime you put a buff on it, it is going to double those stats. Even if it's not permanent, say your Deep Blue buff is at a 50-50 buff and you put it on the Corrupted Myrmidon, it is now a 100-100 buff. Yeah, if I have a Lava Lurker and I have a Myrmidon and I only got one cast, I'm not taking the Myrmidon. But if I've got multiple Golden Zesties and I'm throwing around a bunch of Deep Blue buffs, it doesn't hurt to throw those stats on this to make an absolute monster just to fill in the slot for that time being. So what other optional minions will we can throw into a Deep Blue build? Well, let's face it, anything is good. You could splash in a minion from any tribe, even if it's only for a turn, stick a Deep Blue buff on it, and it's a threat. Do you have Carbonic Copy? Bam, it's huge. Anything with Divine Shield? It's a threat. Do you have Cleave? Is there a Wildfire, a Foe Reaper, or a Blade Collector in the lobby? All instantly a threat. Next turn, don't need them anymore, new opponent, get rid of them. They don't keep the stats, so it doesn't matter. So you always have one slot where you can splash in anything. Typically in these guides, I say, stick with your tribe when I'm trying to explain it to you. But in the case of Deep Blue, where none of these buffs are permanent and there's no reason to not just replace them if you don't want them anymore, it's really easy to just cycle in whatever thing you need to solve the problem of your next opponent. Just a couple spells you'd like to splash into this board whenever possible. If you can't triple that Deep Blue, Eyes of the Earth Mother is an easy way to get a golden version of that buff, which is just a big difference. The moment I have one golden deep blue though, I will stop. There's no real reason to have more. Yeah, you can squeeze out a couple more buffs, but really you're better off using spells like this or just your gold on getting more zesty shakers. Then you cast Eyes of the Earth Mother on your zesty shaker, and now your deep blue buff is crazy. So it definitely is worth buying the Eyes of the Earth Mother if you're doing this build. Even if you already have one golden zesty and I see an Eyes, I will buy the Eyes just for when I find a zesty to immediately make it gold. Well, not immediately. First I'll cast deep blue on it, then I'll make it gold, then I'll cast deep blue on it again. And also channel the Devour. Once again, you're using deep blue a lot in this build. You're going to get really huge buffs out of this thing, as much as 100, 100, 200, 200. If you can make those multiple casts of it on a random minion in the shop and then spit those stats to permanency, it's really good. So buy this spell if you think you can get away with it. It's worth your gold. Trinket wise, you can make any trinkets work, right? But there are a couple of them that make this just go a lot harder. First thing is going to be Replica Cathedral. The first spell you cast each turn casts an extra time. Worst case scenario, that is just 2 casts of a deep blue buff, which means it's scaling faster, which means you're getting bigger faster and winning faster. Definitely worth it. Get a triple reward. You want to use it on that, use it on that. There's plenty of ways you can make value out of this. Next would be something like Spite Scale Sushi Roll. The fact that who cares about the Spite Scale special? That's good. We'll take that. But it's the first 2 Spellcraft cast each turn, cast twice, is massive. Once again, just be careful which ones you cast first. Make sure it's a deep blue one. Even if it's out of order, the value is still hard to not use. It's permanent scaling happening faster, and that's really important. Finally, I would say Shaker Portrait, definitely one of the best. The fact that your zesties are now going to give you extra copies of that spell means, once again, you're scaling it faster. You're casting that thing more times. It's just more stats. Have fun. Kill your opponents. Get monstrously big. That is the deep blue build. That is all you really need to do to make this thing shine and to crush your opponents. It takes a little time. And if you don't get the right pieces fast enough, you will lag behind and you will die. But you can get them. And if you start hitting right, ooh, you are going to be a monster. Next, let's talk Athissa comp. Now, this build is a little harder to pull off because, well, you have to kind of get to higher tiers to make it work. You basically know you're playing this build potentially the moment you find Athissa and you have any or you see any spell generation. Athissa is simple. You cast spells, she buffs Naga. 3 Naga, you can field more. You can fill up your board with Naga, and you can just play a straight all Naga board. You can fill it with a variety of tribes. Typically, I like to kind of keep it small, 3 to 5 at the most Naga, and that's usually about how I will set this build up when I do it. It's nice if you can get a couple of Athissas, throw those stats, stack them high, but the main portion of this build, and the thing that lets you know you're playing it, is obviously going to be Athissa, and then we find the rest of the pieces to go with it. Now, the nice thing about it is that makes everything else in this build optional, because the spell generation could be anything from your trinkets to your hero power to random minions in the shop. Well, Athissa is just gonna buff out those Naga. Now, obviously you want to have a couple Naga on the board, so Athissa is not the only Naga, but the rest can come in the optional because there's so many damn Naga it could be. It makes it a little easy. When we're starting to look at the optional minions, I'm going to say the first one I like myself is the Corrupted Myrmidon. The reason for that being is simple. Athissa is going to be buffing your board via the spells you're casting, and then Corrupted Myrmidon is going to take those stats that Athissa gives them and any of the spells you cast directly upon it, and then double them. Well, I mean, you can't really go wrong with doubling whatever stats you're generating, right? That's pretty easy. Next, this one is very dependent on what kind of boards you're fighting against. If there's a lot of tokens, it might not be useful, but if there's giant murlocs running around, lots of venom, Glow Scale is a great fit because now you have a targeted divine shield. It's a trigger for Athissa. It can be buffed by Athissa. It just works really well on this board, making that, say, Corrupted Myrmidon now a lot harder to kill. Now, if we're running a lot of targeted spells and we have room for it, Critter Wrangler's not a bad fit. It's going to make those spells do a slightly bigger buff, and it's going to scale up with the Athissa. This one, I don't know if it's going to be on your board's end state, but definitely towards the beginning, and maybe when you find that Athissa, you have the Wrangler there to get the extra value from the other spells you're casting. And once again, a useful minion depending on the tribes that are in, but Dagger Spine Thrasher, the ability to have that Divine Shield, Wind Fury, and Venom, and you can actually scale up the stats with this build, so it's actually a threat just statistic-wise, makes it a very useful build against some boards. Obviously, if there's a billion undead running around with a ton of reborn death rattles, it's not going to be insane unless you could really pump the stats on it. But if you're running into a big statted board, this thing can really chew through a lot of it. Orgazoa the Tender is a great way to generate spells. Well, first you have the Spellcraft the Orgazoa itself makes, and then it is going to generate you a Naga every turn from that spell, which typically those will have spells, giving you potentially even more triggers. At the very least, a minion you can sell, potentially a triple for you. So easy value once again, and it not eating those stats really is a big deal because you can just kind of sit there. Maybe it's just a cycle for one turn, or maybe it's got a permanent home on your board just giving you that value. Slither Spear Lord of Gains will fit your board nicely depending on a couple things. How much spell generation do you have? How are you getting access to the spells? Do you have a minion generating them? Is it your Naga? Do you have multiples of the same spell being generated? If you don't have a variety of spells, Slither Spear is not going to do much for you because his buffing is based on the number of spells you cast in their variety, not just on their number itself. There has to be a variety of them. So if you cast the same spell 9 times, he's not only giving you a 1/1 buff. But if you cast 9 different spells, now it's a 9/9 buff to all your other Naga. Now the problem is he doesn't scale, so his scaling is going to come solely from Athissa, but he is also buffing all your other Naga. If you're running 4 or 5 Naga, this is a great fit, even if he's one of them. That's about where I would use him if I'm going to use them. And if you're going to use Slither Spear, once again, you don't want to have too many Naga on your board. Because of this, the way the buffs work, Drakari Enchanter is a good fit. Since Slither Spear's effect is an end of turn effect, Drakari will double that. You can buff this minion with spells, you can use it as a bumper, you can make it as your taunt. It's versatile in that you can use it as a throwaway minion because the only thing you need it for is that end of turn effect. These minions aren't optional, these minions are what I would call cycle throwaway minions. And the reason for that is their only purpose is to generate spells for you and then get off the board. And these are things I want you to keep in mind while you're cycling through shops. You don't want to keep these on your board in any way, shape, or form. They're only there to generate more value for you. And it's going to be things like Oozling Glad-i-ator. Remember, this is going to give you 2 spells. If you have a Slither Spear and you use 1 during one turn, you can save the next one for the turn after and then get that additional buff since he cares about the variety of spells. If alternatively, if you're only running Athissa, throw out the taunts all at once. Get all the benefits you can right away. Something like Shell Collector is so easy. It's a minion that you're going to play. It's going to give you a coin, which will count as a trigger, and then sell it. Basically, you're playing 1 gold for the buffs. Now, the thing to remember is if you're running Lord of the Gains, if you've already played a coin, and it's not a tavern coin, it's from another shell collector, you actually can pass on this. You probably don't need it. But also, if you're running a bunch of Thissas, maybe you don't care since it's only going to really cost you 1 coin to cycle this. Just kick it through and don't worry about it. Shell Whistler is another one. It's going to be a random spell, so it might not be great, but it also might be free because it might give you another minion from the spell it gives you. It's just a really good effect with all the buffing you're getting and the economy you can get out of it. Shell Whistler with tier 2 spells being so economy driven really is helpful in that regard. Disco Shuffler, Rodeo Performer. Hell, if you've got space on your board, Whirling Lasso-matic. There are so many minions that you are going to use to generate spells and then get rid of them. And they're situational. A lot of these say, hey, do you have Lord of the Gains? No, you don't have to worry about these. Do you? Okay. Have I already cast that spell this turn? Or is it just has such a variety of spells it offers, it's worth the risk? It's really easy to cycle a lot of this stuff and get the big value. Now, part of you might say, well, a lot of these Heretic are battle cries, so I should put a brand on the board. And that's where I'm going to say, no. Your board's already having a hard time with the number of minions we've gone over that can fit really well on it. Putting a brand on this board feels excessively, just very greedy and not really worth it. I feel like if you do that for any length of time beyond, say, a turn while you're really far ahead or fighting the dead guy, it's not really worth it. And at that point, you're kind of just throwing away gold. So unless you really are powerful and get away with it, I would avoid even thinking about putting a brand on this board. And of course, really obvious, there are a ton of spells that are good. While you're cycling with this, any spell that is cheap is going to be worth it, especially if it's, 2 gold makes a minion, if it's 1 gold, if it's a tavern coin. Why on earth wouldn't you just cycle that spell, right? It's easy, it's free, go for it. Things like Spite Scales Special are going to give you the cast of the spell, and then 3 more Spellcrafts, which could be 3 completely different spells that will give you economy, minions, it depends what tier you're on, but a lot of different things, making Special very much worth it. Saloon's Finest, hey, you just filled the shop with spells you can cast. Once again, especially if you're running Lord of Gains, it gets really nice because you can cherry pick the ones you want. Since we already know you're running Athissa, you're going to get value no matter what out of something like this. It's just easy. Just remember, any cheap spell is going to be a friend of yours in this scenario. When it comes to trinkets, we're not even going to worry about lesser ones. Why? Well, because you're probably not getting your Athissa until after you've already got your lesser trinkets. Let's not worry about that. You don't know what lane you're going to be in. There's no way on turn 1. Well, there's one way. Maybe you're playing Phelan, and his hero power lets you pick your tier 2, 4, and 6 minions, and you're like, Athissa! Okay, you know you're playing Athissa potentially. Most of us don't know we're playing Athissa on turn 1. Usually that's a really bad idea. But looking at the greater trinkets, things that would be obvious would be things like Book of Medivh. We're looking at Colorful Compass because they're still Naga. You could still just sell them for coins. They're going to have their various spells they cast. Lore Walker Scroll, got a bunch of targeted spells. It's going to give you a little bit extra tempo. Precious Pearl, because hey, it's a 30-30 buff. In addition to all the other stats you get from casting spells, you're putting a 30-30 buff, even if it's temporary on your board, but you're getting it every turn. And in the case of Precious Pearl, that is the only way you're going to get this spell. They're not going to generate extra copies of this one typically, beyond using it on like a Zesty Shaker, which usually doesn't fit in this board either because just don't have the space for it. Well, it sounds fun, and yeah, the gold one is good. There's too many minions already on your board from the way things are going. And finally, maybe Peace Bloom Candle, because it lets you pick 2 expensive spells that might give you a better result for free. Trinket wise, these are the ones that I find work decently. In the case of Candle, it's kind of like the oh shit. It's like, well, the best of the worst. I guess I'll take this. Now, this is typically how I will build out this build. Does this build work great consistently? No. There's a lot of super fast scaling boards that basically don't have to do anything. There's an undead board sitting there playing Butcher's Sickle every turn, and they're gaining 6 attack to their entire horde of tokens forever, every single turn by playing it on tier 6 minions. And you are cycling a billion spells while they're like, okay, sell 1 minion, Butcher, find a triple or not, okay, turn over. Meanwhile, you are cycle, looking for the perfect spells, trying to remember which ones you cast, freaking out, having fun, but then losing to someone who's essentially AFK can be very frustrating. And that's why you don't see this build as much, because it's hard to do, and it's tier 6 build, really. Well, if this is on 5, a lot of the toys you need are up on 6. Could stay on 5, but you better have the perfect setup. You better triple into a lot of good stuff if you're going to try staying on 5 with that. That's it, folks. That's Naga. We are done with them. What did you think? I like Naga. I think they're fun. I know they're one of the least performing tribes right now, but I still enjoy their play style in the late game when you get that fun, cast a billion spells, make a lot of decisions. It feels like when you win with them, typically you earned it, and that just feels good naturally. Right now, the season is going to be ending, it looks like, on December 3rd. Now, does that mean we're going to lose trinkets before the 3rd? Possibly. Does that mean we're going to get new tribes? New mechanics? I don't know. I know nothing. Remember, I'm not a content creator. Please like, subscribe, yell at Blizzard, please, for me. I'd appreciate it. But, you know, it's all those things where the season is winding down, and I am not done with my guides, which feels really bad. I don't know. I can push out dragons. I can push out pirates pretty easy. I just don't know if there's going to be enough time for there to be a lot of value in it at this point. It is definitely my fault. I drag my feet too much. I have some neat ideas for next season. I've worked on my schedule a little bit. It looks like I'm just going to have to spend a lot more time editing videos and working on stuff, because I really would like to have all these guides out kind of in the first month. Means I just be doing a lot of 8-10 hour days to edit this stuff out and make it. The issue usually is the footage, which takes me a while to get. So I don't know, maybe I can find a partner to help me get some footage, or I can talk to someone and use some of their footage who I respect and see what I can do with that. All right, all, that's it. I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. I hope you had fun. I hope you had a good time. See you in the Battlegrounds. Later.